Hey students, Chapter 2, Respect in the Institutional Settings of Healthcare. Today, we are going to talk, see if I can get this to work again. Objectives: compare the perspectives of viewing healthcare from each of the glacier's 3 realms. List 4 major forces that have resulted in current structures. Compare public and private sector, that one's going to be important. And compare relationships with total and partial institutions. So the first thing I want to talk about is really what is considered an institution. So today, almost all healthcare provided, administered, and managed is through what we call an institution. And depending on where we're talking about, your patient might be really happy they're there or really upset that they're there. And depending on the condition or the diagnosis might change those two. So what would you consider as an institution? Think about what it's called, the definition. Hospitals, ambulatory clinics, nursing homes, long-term care, rehab settings, research centers, diagnostic labs. Schools are considered institutions, hospice, and spas, actually. So if we're talking about the policies of an institution, I am sure that you have all seen in places of work, the ones who work in facilities, have seen a policy and procedure manual. That manual is about 6 inches thick and probably has never been read front to back, but has all of the policies for each job. And all jobs or businesses in life have these kind of policies no matter where you work. And that is, and again, also specific behaviors for the good of that organization. What you're told that you need to do in this facility for the job that you're doing. I know that when I worked at retail, they had their own policies on how to process claims or returns, or this can happen in insurance and especially in healthcare. You want to be respectful to the patient's families, but be loyal and respectful of the management and administration too. These policies and practices must respond to societal values. So when these companies are making up their policies, it's not just always what the company wants, but what the society wants and what that society needs. What is our goal for this company to gain and put our patients at the top of that list? Glacier had 3 realms. They had a societal, institutional, and individual. I'm not going to read these out loud for you. You guys can do that on your own. But really, when we're looking at this, we have to understand that institutions sit in between the societal and the individual realm. So when we're talking about what our needs are, our patient, that individual, is really what we're looking to help. And our institution is going to take what the society needs and what our institution needs to help that individual. And again, you can come back to this a little bit later to reread it. You do not need to memorize them. You just need to understand the difference between societal, institutional, and individual. And I've sort of already stated this already, but when we say one observation is that institutions' policies and practices must respond to societal values, but also be responsive to values that guide the health profession practice. Our patients are always our top priority. And we need to make sure that we are gearing our healthcare practice towards what the patient's needs, but also including what the society is looking to do. In my notes here, I would have that right now, society, what I wrote before was that society would want medical marijuana. We're looking at different ways past opioids and, trying to do pain management and all these other alternative forms. Now, with the virus, I'd say we're a little different with society right now needs us all to stay home is basically what's happening. But again, if we're thinking about outside of this abnormal thing that's happening in our world, think about things that society wants for your profession. So key values of an institution. These are just a few listed. I have another few that I'm going to read off to you too, but some values for the institution. Efficiency of operation. How well is the institution running? When you think about where you work, how well and how efficient are you in the operations of the job? We're talking about freedom from undue regulation or that autonomy. Autonomy is like your independence. Free enterprise, so your freedom to compete favorably in a marketplace. But who are we competing with? If we're thinking about Dreyer, they might be competing with Select or CPRS or Madden or some of the other outpatient facilities. We have social justice for underserved population. Another key value is high quality service in response to health needs of the community. And financial viability. When you are thinking about Glacier's 3 realms, that will help you decide where you want to be when you work. Because remember, when you're interviewing for a position, the company, yes, they are interviewing you to see if you are a good candidate, but you are also interviewing the facility to see if that's somewhere where you want to be, and if those values of that institution are where you want to be and they match up with your key values. We sort of talked about this in your chapter 1. If you are drawn to chronic health or end of life, then you might be more drawn to a hospital or a rehab or hospice. Make sure that your ideal placement is consistent with what your values hold and where you want to see that position or that facility going. We are looking at a new model, a multi-service team-oriented institutional environments. So we're kind of going away from an organization with one function, and we're starting to move into these, they say, housing health plans. And basically, we're talking about a few different areas of practice in one building. So your multi-service team. I know that WellSpan has done this before, where they have your MRI with your physician, with your PT, all in one building, all in one environment to decrease the need for patients to go other reasons. The 4 reasons why we're going to that model are listed here: industrialization, urbanization, specialization, and team-oriented. So industrialization is the Industrial Revolution. It's compartmentalization of public and private life functions. Urbanization, the movement of people to the cities, and the resulting potential for increasing efficiency by offering more centralized sites. So basically meaning that more people are in one area and we're just allowing them to go to one section or one office to be able to hit a few different services that they need. Specialization and the emergence of specialized medicine necessitating a centralized site for coordinated care. And a team-oriented management, the evolution from the single profession and patient to teams of professionals, sharing information, equipment, and other institutional resources. And again, so we are looking at different offices having multiple different things that you can go to for in one building. So you can see your physician and your PT and get an MRI all in one building without having to go to different locations. Also, that information can be shared all at once. Your PT can send your physician a re-eval that will be sent quickly without having to send it in the mail or fax and get to the right person. It goes directly to the doctor. So characteristics of institutional relationships. You have your public sector relationships and your private sector relationships. So your public sector is interactions reserved for engagements within institutions of public life. Your private sector relationships are reserved for the world of family, friends, and other intimates. So your public sector relationships are more these social boundaries. You're going to see this is where your student-professor relationships are set, or your patient-PTA relationships are set. Your private sector relationships are more your friends and family. These are people outside of your work environment. Your public sector typically serves a purpose and then they go away. And then your private sector are more likely to continue throughout your lifespan or for longer periods of time. What about if you go to someone's house to treat? Would you be considered in a public or a private sector? It would still be public because of being a patient-therapist relationship. Now, aside from your public and private sector relationships, you have your total and partial institutions. So you have a total institution, which is where personal autonomy is totally or seriously compromised. This is where you're thinking of a convent or a prison. Things are taken away. You can be placed there voluntary or involuntary. So a nursing home or a locked-time Alzheimer's unit would be an example of that. Partial institutions, which is constrain patients' autonomy in some important ways, but also allow for some varying degrees. So you have some ways where you can move around and you still have a little bit of your autonomy left. This could be a skilled nursing facility, or sometimes even outpatient is considered in that section. And you'll see the definition of autonomy is right there on that page as well. So honoring the interface of institutions and society, there are laws and regulations to maintain the competence of your patient. All healthcare institutions are accredited by a national accrediting board. You must be a licensed therapist to work. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. They say a licensed, certified, or registered by passing a test in every state. I have never seen a PTA be a registered PTA. I've only seen a licensed PTA. That does not mean that it's not out there. There are 3 different ways that you could be that. What is your test called? Do you remember? The MPTE. Do you know what that stands for? National Physical Therapy Exam. The national certifying bodies also have requirements for your continuing ed, and I believe we've talked about this before. Do you remember how many hours you need as a PTA for continuing ed each renewal licensing period? That would be 30 hours. You need at least 2 hours in law and ethics and 4 hours in emergency care. You will also need malpractice insurance, which you guys actually have already gotten because of your internships. But typically your company provides that. Not always, but typically they do. So there are some laws and regulations to prevent discrimination in the institutions and in the society themselves. You have the title, the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Opportunity Act, Equal Pay Act, Age Discrimination, the Rehab Act, and Americans with Disabilities Act. Your laws will always change. They will always be updated. Please make sure that you are keeping on top of what your regulations and laws are. You might need to know these, so I would just put a little star on the page just to remind yourself to kind of go over these in case I ask you to list any. So even though you have your rights as a therapist, patients have their rights as well. Typically, all places of business will have a documented handout for patients' rights. It will change per office. It's just dependent on what that office wants to say or do or how they want to hand it out. That's up to the office. This is where your patient's HIPAA falls under, your Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. If you are not familiar with that, I recommend you just kind of brushing up on that. Typically, it's to protect your patient's information. And then also patients have a right to do grievances. So right now, they are getting more into patient representatives in facilities, either in the facility itself or having a department who does that, who takes the grievance in, and then they process it and they research it. And there's also employees have a whistleblower's law, where someone could report an incompetent, unethical, or an impaired colleague, and then nothing happens to them for reporting it. Everything's kept under wraps. So the patient's rights include considerate and respectful care, accurate and complete information, participation in healthcare decisions, and privacy and confidentiality. They also have a right to informed consent. So this involves disclosing to the patient what is to be done to them, including potential risks and desired outcomes, and obtaining the patient's consent to the procedure. I would put a little star next to that as well. You're going to need to understand this, and you've already learned about it in modalities that you are consenting for your patient to do these things. So this is disclosure of relevant information. The treatment, it's what exactly are you doing, the treatment itself. Any goals to that treatment. Desired outcomes should be discussed with the patient. And this should all be done in layman's terms so your patient can understand what you're talking about. And then the patient has the right to give or refuse consent. They have the right to refuse any treatment, and they will. It happens a lot. So if you're disclosing relevant information, you're telling your patient you want to do an ultrasound. The goals of the ultrasound is to increase range of motion. You shouldn't feel anything. You should just feel a little warmth. If you feel anything, you can let me know. I want to do this and that. It's all giving in layman's terms. And then they can say, yes, that's okay, or no, no, thank you. So that is it for today on chapter 2. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me and let me know. I will be happy to answer them as soon as I can. And I appreciate you guys working with me. Thanks. Bye, guys.